Hey, folks, it's Nate. It's time I got back to the drawing board. It's been a while since I talked to you. Been kind of busy, but I'm back working on a little fan art here for Vestige, latest project featuring Donald DeLay and some of the folks over at War Campaign, which I guess is a YouTube channel kind of uh, backing up EVS and all that crazy stuff he does. Don't know a whole lot about him, but their project looks pretty sweet. So there you go. Of course, I like Donald's art, and character seems like a lot of fun. So that's what I'm doing tonight. I hope you all are doing pretty well. Tonight, I want to talk a little bit more about writing because that's kind of the big thing in my wheelhouse. I know I do a lot of art while I'm talking, but the fact is, I'm not a professional artist. I'm completely self-taught, and I am a trained writer. So I thought, when I started this, it would be probably better to talk about that. In time, I'm sure I'll develop my own wheelhouse of stuff that I talk about, but what I really wanted to talk about tonight is conflict and how important it is to most stories. It's not something we see a whole lot of, at least not physical conflict, in a lot of comic books from the big two anymore. I guess DC has had a fair amount in the last couple of years, but really, Marvel has these really low T books. You can see people like your boy Zach, and of course, just some guy talking about him, and not a whole lot really happens in them conflict wise. And the truth is, you can't tell a good story without conflict. And I know a lot of people will probably take issue with that, but the fact is, it's true. Conflict is what drives a story forward. Think about all the stories you really like to tell. There was probably some kind of conflict there. Now, it wasn't necessarily between you and someone else. There are, they say 7 or 8 really big conflicts in storytelling. They are man versus man. That's where you fight with someone else. Man versus machine, which is you fight against progress, or against a computer or some other very impersonal device that kind of represents progress or something like that. You have man versus himself, which is where you fight some part of yourself that you really don't like or care for. You have man versus nature. You see that a lot in Jack London stories, like To Build a Fire, where a man goes out into the world and he suffers a mishap and he learns just how dangerous the world really can be. Um, you have man versus God, which is not something you see a whole lot of in modern fiction. We've become so highly secularized, it doesn't happen very much anymore. There's not a concrete enough idea of God. But the idea is that there is something divine in the world, and the character is at odds with it. And it's a very interesting, it's an interesting kind of story. I don't know if I would ever try and tell one of those stories. Like I said, we live in such a secular society. Ideas of God are so varied. They're very hard stories to tell. But you saw it a lot. You saw it a lot in older literature, say of the medieval period. But not really so much before that, because in Greek and Roman literature you had the next conflict, which was man versus fate, which is the idea there is something about yourself that dooms you, and your whole conflict is against that part of you that is weighing you down. It's a very interesting kind of a story, but again, not one we see a whole lot of today, because most stories are concerned with your conflict with the society around you, which is that's another type of conflict itself, and that is of course man versus the world, in which a character confronts some aspect of the world that is keeping them from reaching their goals, preventing them from doing what it is they want to do. And that is very common. That's the oppression narrative, which is so treasured by a lot of storytelling today. We see it everywhere from comic books to novels to the news to even movies like Battle Angel. They all very heavily play up that kind of a conflict. And, there's nothing wrong with that kind of conflict inherently, although it is my personal opinion that particular conflict is quite overdone in the modern day and age. It's getting boring. It's getting stale. It's not as interesting as it used to be. So let's see. We have man versus nature, man versus God, man versus fate, man versus machine. I believe that's all of them. So those different kinds of conflict are the basis of your story. You have a person at odds with something around them, and they need to somehow make progress towards overcoming that obstacle, and that's the heart of a story right there. And if you don't have that, you just have a whole bunch of stuff that just sort of happens. Now, the truth is, life is just a whole bunch of stuff that just happens. But the fact is, people don't want stories to be like real life. Forget about that. Anyone who tells you that doesn't know what they're talking about. That's just not the way storytelling works. People want their stories to be different from real life. They want it to have purpose. They want them to have direction. They want them to say something. It doesn't have to be something profound, but they want them to say something. And the fact is, unfortunately, most days you go about your life and your life doesn't really say anything to you. You just do stuff. And, that is not the core of a good story. I suppose, you do have your slice of life stories, and that's very popular in manga fandom. And I honestly don't understand it. I'm a lifelong manga reader, but I have just never been able to understand the fascination with slice of life. And I suppose if that's your genre, okay, more power to you. But even those have little conflicts in them, little misunderstandings. Usually man versus man, and they do their thing. And I'm not, since I really don't care for it a whole lot. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of more time on it, other than to say it's there, and it manages, but it still includes conflict, because that's an important part of storytelling. So I guess I'm doing a little story on how to build good conflicts, because even people who understand that they need conflict, a lot of times they just do one kind. And in order to really tell a compelling story, it helps to have many different kinds of conflict going at once. Look at, say, Star Wars. So let's just take Return of the Jedi as an example. Luke Skywalker is in conflict, several different kinds of conflict in that movie. Of course, he's in conflict with other characters. He's in conflict with Jabba when he goes to rescue Han. Jabba wants to keep Han. Luke wants Han to go free. That's a conflict. Luke is in conflict with his father. He wants his father to return to the light side. His father wants Luke to join him on the dark side. But at the same time, Luke is in conflict with himself. The dark side is not some mystical, well, it is a mystical force, but it is also part of where that mystical force comes from is within himself, within his own negative emotions, as it were, his anger, his fear, his aggression. These are fonts of the dark side, and he has to confront those in order to win his conflict with Vader, with the Emperor, and even to a certain extent with Jabba the Hutt. When Luke goes up against Jabba, he isn't scared. He isn't angry. He's always calm. He's always conflicted. And since he doesn't have any of those emotional outbursts that we see in his confrontation with Vader and with the Emperor, he is able to confront Jabba the Hutt much more effectively than he confronts Darth Vader or the Emperor. He's in control. That struggle was doubtlessly going on because anger, fear, and aggression are natural human emotions. And there's a whole question of whether Jediism is a good philosophy or not, that I'm not going to delve into. But clearly, that conflict was going on within Luke the whole time. So you have that layer of conflict. And so clearly envisioning the different layers of conflict helps. And of course, there can be layers of the same kind of conflict. The rebellion is a conflict of characters versus other characters. That is a context, a layer of Luke's struggle against the Emperor and Darth Vader. One of them is large and more impersonal, bordering on, man versus society or man versus the world. But at the same time, it is personal at times, and Luke lives out the personal side of that conflict. So you can have layers to conflict. You can have multiple conflicts. But the real thing is you really need to think about your conflicts. They cannot simply boil down to, one side bad, the other side good. It could. Those very simplistic kind of conflicts. There's nothing wrong with them. They can be entertaining to have, and they set up fun physical conflicts. A franchise like Godzilla has a lot of that. That's more of a man versus nature, with Godzilla being nature. But there's always another layer to those Godzilla stories, you may notice. They talk a lot about pollution, about mankind's use of resources, about nuclear war. Really, the Godzilla series is kind of a heavy-handed parable. And so there's that extra layer of, man versus the world, but then a man versus himself as they confront how they use these powerful tools that they are developing in the technological age. So even when there are simplistic conflicts, there are frequently more complex conflicts underlying those. They don't have to be big, they don't have to be complicated, but they are there, and they lend stories richness, they lend stories depth. So I think that's a good thing to think about. You also have to think about, how the conflict is going to play out. I'm going to talk more about that in another video. I have a whole theory of building a conflict that I intend to discuss more in another video. The point is, for now, remember conflict. Conflict is the heart of a story. It's always messy. It's never simple. It's important, vitally important, to making a story interesting, making a story more than just a series of events that happens. And right now, a good sense and understanding of conflict is a big thing, I think, that we're missing in storytelling. So I hope that this video inspires you to think a little bit harder about conflict, look at it a little deeper, look at it a little more systematically. And I hope you'll join me on Friday when I talk a little bit about understanding your conflict and how it's going to play out and why people will do what they do as they fight. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, there's a like button and subscribe button down below. Use them as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.